and Justice, North American Islamophobia. My name is Rabab Abdelhadi. I'm at the Arab and Muslim Ethnicity and Diaspora Studies program at San Francisco State University and on the editorial board of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and I'm really happy that we are having the 7th annual Islamophobia International Conference. I'm going to briefly introduce the speakers because we don't have a lot of, everybody has 20 minutes to speak, and then we want to be able to have a discussion. And we have until, well, not 5:45, 6, right? 6. 6:05. And I know that Azza and Khano need to leave like 5 minutes before 6, right? So, because they need to catch a flight, so we need to rush through it. Well, before I even start the panel officially, I want to acknowledge that we are meeting and convening on stolen indigenous Iranian people's land. That's really important to acknowledge. And our speakers on this panel are, the first paper is going to be presented by Azza Bassaruddin and Khanum Sheikh. And I actually had prepared, I just want to say who people are. Khanum Sheikh is Assistant Professor of Gender and Women's Studies at California State University, Northridge. She had received many awards, including the American Association of University Women, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, and the National Science Foundation. 2010, she was awarded the University of California Presidential Postdoctoral Fellowship. There is much more. I'm going to stop at that. Azza Bassaruddin is a research scholar at the UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles Center for the Study of Women. She has held fellowships and visiting scholars at Harvard University, Syracuse University, University Kebangasan in Malaysia, I hope I'm saying it correctly, University San Malaysia, and the American University in Cairo. She also received several awards from the Werner Grand Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, and the National Science Foundation, among others. And her book is actually out. It's called Humanizing the Sacred, Sisters in Islam, and the Struggle for Gender Justice in Malaysia. And it was published by University of Washington Press, 2016. So I welcome both Azza and Khanum to present the first paper.
My name is Khanum, and this is Azza, and this is Khanum. I don't have a name tag here. I just have to... Oh, we got a name tag for me. Thank you. So I have to apologize in advance. We will have to run out at 5:45 because we have a flight back to Los Angeles. Myself and Azza are both, we got our PhDs together in Gender and Women's Studies from UCLA, and I work on women in social movements in Pakistan, religious movements in Pakistan, and some in the United States, and Azza works on Malaysian women's feminist activism in Malaysia, and like Rabab said, she just published a book on an organization called Sisters in Islam in Malaysia. And myself and Azza started our PhDs in 2001, I think, at UCLA, so we've been together ever since as grad students and now as fellow researchers, and we've collaborated on many projects. So this is one of our projects that we have been working on in the context of Los Angeles, Southern California. And it actually ends up following well with Paula's talk on CVE, so we can cut out some of our sections giving background on CVE. What we're looking at in our project is the unfolding of CVE in Southern California. And secondly, we look at the ways that women are incorporated as partners in domestic counterterrorism measures within Southern California. So we have a sort of specific focus on women and gender. And thirdly, we look at questions of feminist activism and securitization in the local politics of the war on terror. And we're doing sort of a joint presentation, we'll go back and forth.
So, as you know, today we live in a climate of ongoing political violence on a global scale, and surrounded by horrendous news about groups such as ISIL and Boko Haram enacting misogynistic violence upon the bodies of women and girls to assert power and control in the name of authentic Islam. Most Muslims around the world have been outraged by these retrogressive and violent interpretations of Islam, and some have become active to counter this type of violence. Here we want to quickly illuminate, as you can see from the PowerPoint, 3 examples of feminist activism of Muslim women pushing back against patriarchy from within. And by no means are these limited to these 3 categories. There are more, but we want to highlight these 3 categories as they have attained some sort of visibility other forms of activism. Now, the first one is feminist, the Muslim feminists in terms of women who are working within an Islamic framework, reinterpreting the sacred text, reinterpreting Islamic tradition from a feminist perspective or a gender egalitarian perspective, to expose the consolidation of power and patriarchy in religious knowledge production, to excavate the moments in which patriarchal power becomes consolidated, and to intervene in scriptures. So scholars such as Amina Wadud, Asma Barlas, Kisha Ali. So we see this kind of scholarly work within this category. And the next one is the native testimonials. And these are women women activists who have openly denounced Islam. These are Muslims themselves, but who have denounced Muslim patriarchy that exercise power over women and queers within the community. Most of them were raised Muslims and are currently located in the West, such as Asra Namani, Irshad Manji, and Ayan Hirsi Ali. Now, the third model is the one that we're particularly interested in that we want to discuss today, is what we call the empowerment model, or more specifically is the Muslim American exceptionalism model. Now, we look at this model of feminist empowerment as primarily associated with American Muslims who are eager to emerge as leaders in the Muslim community and to provide a compelling narrative to the misogyny of Islamist groups and to fight domestic terrorism through entry into partnership with federal and local law enforcement agencies. These model is also linked to Islamophobia, for example, in how women's experience of anti-Muslim discrimination after 9/11 have propelled them into activism. Now, this is this third model that we're interested in, and we will expand this model in a little bit. As we've heard from Paula in detail about the Countering Violent Extremism Initiative, so we don't have to basically go back and explain to you what it is, but Los Angeles is one of the cities where the pilot program is taking place, and this is what we're looking at. Our research is within the larger context of the CVE in Los Angeles. And the question for us is, why does gender matter in the CVE programming in Los Angeles? And the reason why is because CVE in LA specifically target women as partners in domestic counterterrorism. In this project, we are concerned about how women are incorporated into local counterterrorism measures via CVE, and to think about the question of feminist activism in the context of the local war on terror.
So in this next section, we wanted to focus, to zoom in on an example of this kind of model of women's empowerment, through partnering with local law and federal law enforcement agencies. And we want to begin by talking about this organization called AMWEC, which is American Muslim Women's Empowerment Council. And we refer to it as AMWEC. AMWEC is an Orange County based, so that's sort of, Southern California, south of Los Angeles. Orange County based Muslim women's nonprofit organization that has been identified as an ideal partner for the implementation of CVE in Los Angeles. AMWEC is made up of primarily upper and middle class Pakistani and South Asian women. It was established around 2006 to educate Muslim women around their rights and to provide general support for women and youth in Orange County. When AMWEC leaders heard about CVE in Los Angeles, they themselves approached the Los Angeles Police Department's Chief Downing to express their desire to become partners with local and federal law enforcement in driving CVE on the ground locally. So in April of last year, we attended AMWEC's second annual conference in Orange County titled American Muslims and Their Crucial Role in Countering Violent Extremism. So this conference was designed as a space for participants to, quote, meet Muslims and experts from all spheres of life and ask questions about Islam, violent extremism, and women's rights, end quote. There was an empowerment bazaar that, quote, showcased American Muslim women and their efforts to engage, inform, and integrate into the fabric of mainstream America, end quote. So we had heard about this conference through my sisters who live in Orange County and other folks, and we thought, this is really interesting. Why is this called, why is this American Muslim women and their role in countering violent extremism? And since both of us are sort of gender studies people, we thought, we should attend this. So we went online to register for the conference, and we noticed that participants were encouraged to sign up for one of 4 workshops. And these were the workshops that were available for us to sign up for. The first one was CIA / leadership. The second one was U.S. citizenship and immigration services / immigration policies. The third one was FBI /hate crimes, and the fourth one was Homeland Security. So needless to say, we were really excited to attend these workshops. At this point, we'd like to share with you the look and the feel of the conference. When we entered the designated conference space within the Buena Park Hotel, we were both a bit stunned by the saturation of the space with red, white, and blue hues. At a glance, one could simply have mistaken it for a 4th of July celebration. Conference materials and brochures evoked American patriotism. At the entrance of the hallway was a large banner that served as a centerpiece for the conference, and a backdrop for media and photography. Scattered across the banner were an array of inspirational quotes from famous people, including Eleanor Roosevelt, Prophet Muhammad, Benazir Bhutto, and Maya Angelou, to just name a few people. Both of us were really struck by this interesting mix of East and West in a largely South Asian American Muslim gathering. This display of strands of feminist and religious thinkers, politicians and philosophers, and the words that they had uttered in support of women's empowerment was indeed striking. Perhaps even more striking and occupying much more physical space were the CIA and FBI booths situated at the entrance of the hall, within which the conference was to take place. Staffed by a diverse array of women working for these agencies, each booth displayed brochures and informational materials featuring women and men of Asian, African American, and Hispanic origins. Clearly a strategic display of multiculturalism, indicating both the need for and willingness of these agencies to employ men and women from diverse ethnic backgrounds, including, of course, Muslims. As we sat amidst a crowd of around maybe 100 people, not quite knowing what to expect, the conference opened with the national anthem, accompanied by a flag salute ceremony conducted by LAPD officers, led in accordance with the conference theme by a female officer marching up to the stage. So in terms of this project, it's sort of large, and we've narrowed it down to a few sort of main points that we would like to stress in our analysis in relation to AMWEC's positioning vis-a-vis CVE. Specifically, we analyze how securitization of Islam and Muslims is a highly gendered process, and how the promotion of women's rights is closely tied to national security agendas. So the first point in kind of the analysis that we conduct is we look at this model minority politics that come into play with AMWEC's discourses. The founder of AMWEC is Anila Ali. She's of Pakistani origin, and she was one of the women who Paula showed some sort of images of the White House summit on countering violent extremism. And so Paula talked about Salam al-Mariyati from MPAC, and Anila Ali, the president of this women's organization, was also invited and to represent sort of the Southern California community. And we unfortunately don't have as much time. We wanted to show you a tiny clip of her speech at this White House summit, but I think we may not have enough time to do that. But in summary, it's really interesting. Anila is sort of at the White House summit, and one of the points, it's a 3-minute speech that she makes, but the main point that she makes within that is talking about how American Muslims are a highly educated, this is her saying, she says they're a highly educated population, they're an affluent population, unlike British Muslims or Muslims in other countries, who may be less educated or class ascendant. And because of their privileges in the United States, it makes them less prone to terrorism. So it's sort of like this, we are the good, educated and content Muslims, and so we're not actually prone to violence. So it's a very interesting clip. I think we may have put the link, well, we could share the link with you later if you like. It's pretty interesting. And one of the things that comes through in sort of her representations are, this type of narrative that AMWEC presents at the national level, which sort of propels this organization to becoming the hyper-visible face of the empowered Muslim woman. We suggest that this model of empowerment is very much premised on class ascendance and an uncritically patriotic sentiment wrapped up in the romance of a model minority politics that promises a smooth entrance into the American dream. What we're saying here is that this performance does a couple of things. First, it reflects a larger project through which non-white immigrants enter the American dream and secure their own safety based on their willingness to support U.S. capitalism and its expansionism around the world. Second, it forecloses possibility, this kind of performance forecloses possibilities for building alliances with other other communities of color who face discrimination and racism on an ongoing basis, and other Muslims who are not part of this highly educated statistic that Ali quotes. It also forecloses possibility for building alliances with those who incorporate an analysis of the impact of U.S. empire abroad or domestic racism and poverty within the U.S., etc. Our second sort of point that we kind of analyze in more depth in our paper is this issue of banal multiculturalism. So sort of in some of the interviews we've begun conducting, it's sort of interesting how multiculturalism comes into play. And as we know, CVE, is a really nebulous, it's really nebulous in nature. What is it really about? How does CVE translate into concrete programs on the ground, right? So people are fairly unwilling to clearly say, I am getting funding from CVE to carry out this project. So we found that it's a little difficult to be able to make really clear linkages in terms of funds, etc. But when we asked AMWEC members, here are some examples that they shared for us, right? Like we said, how are you participating in CVE? Can you give us some examples, right? And so they said we have received no funds as such, but we're doing many initiatives that actually show how we are participating in countering violent extremism. One, for example, they cited was cricket matches. Cricket was sport, right, which is really common in South Asia. So cricket matches organized for Muslim youth with law enforcement agents present. So in fact, Chief Downing, of LAPD initiated the first cricket match in Southern California. Second, here's a flyer of a fashion show. So fashion shows for women featuring clothes by exclusive South Asian designers to showcase the beautiful culture of South Asia. As you can see from this image, this one was called The Colors of the Indus. Now, at the LAPD, apparently, not apparently, they told us that they secured a fancy downtown venue for this fashion show, and there was many LAPD officers in attendance of this fashion show. So it's sort of an interesting collusion if you think about this, right? So AMWEC's fashion show showcasing culture in partnership with state agencies is precisely what banal multiculturalism is about. This form of multiculturalism is premised on celebratory, boutique pluralism that seeks tolerance of difference without grounding it in a critical analysis of social, racial, and economic difference, while situating within a larger spectrum of racial and power politics. Its goal is to emphasize the sort of fun aspects of racial, religious, national difference, a logic that becomes commonsensical over time and produces certain subject positions and subjectivities.
So our third point is the productive convergence between state agencies and AMWEC. There are a few productive convergences in our project, but we want to focus on one, which is motherhood, because this is one of the most productive convergences. At AMWEC's conference, law enforcement officers repeatedly stress the importance of motherhood in self-counterterrorism measures. In this sense, women are seen as having access to intimate domains of family, relationship, and communities, and are therefore more apt to detect radicalization. In AMWEC, the AMWEC women themselves are very clear about how women have special perspective in terms of trying to juggle motherhood, professional life, and et cetera, et cetera. And as one interviewee mentioned, and I quote, "I think women can be the first in the line of defense against terrorism as vigilant mothers to protect our children against violence," end quote. Now, at this point, we see that AMWEC's stance converges with that of the state efforts to involve women in counterterrorism measures domestically and to incorporate women as key partners in these efforts. The fourth point, which is something that we really want to focus on, is the sort of empowerment that comes about through a liberal feminist framework. For us, AMWEC women perform a sort of Muslim feminist empowerment in their eagerness to emerge as leaders of the Muslim community, to provide a competing narrative to misogyny of Islamist groups, and to form partnership with local and federal law enforcement agencies. AMWEC women speak about how silence was not an option, and that they choose to engage the issue, to speak out and educate around Muslim stereotypes. Coming into activism to address injustice is indeed admirable. But it is also crucial to be aware of the frameworks in which such activism is conducted. In this case, the framework is rooted in securing individual rights within the context of securing the nation, that is, national security, which leads to a distorted version of justice. One of AMWEC's critique of American Muslim organizations is that they do not engage the mainstream. Rather, they prefer to work on the margins, taking an oppositional stance against state agencies. AMWEC see the need to have a place at the CVE table. Now, this translates into being involved in shaping how CVE unfolds in Southern California and how it operates on the ground. And while we believe women's participation at any table is necessary, in the case of CVE, we must be mindful about how women are being incorporated as a means to justify the securitization of Muslim communities. And let's be clear that there is a specific type of Muslim woman that fits the profile of an ideal CVE partner. It is the modern and moderate Muslim woman who has the potential to remake Islam and Muslims to become more compatible with tenets of democracy, equality, and freedom. Right, so for us, then this begs the question as to whether or not the politics of empowerment and the desire to articulate a counter-narrative for the misogyny of the Islamist groups can be neatly separated from co-optational politics of the state. What, in other words, are the limitations of speech implicit in this model of empowerment? Another key question for us is how does extracting and privileging woman as a category, as if isolated from the intersection of class, race, nation-state, immigrant identities, war, and Islamophobia, annex a politics that may in fact sanction certain types of violence while speaking out against other types of violence. What emerges then is a clear appropriation of and incorporation of liberal feminist rhetoric that necessitates the presence of women at decision-making tables. And this was clear from both AMWEC, the conference we attended, and in the language of CVE that mentioned women as partners in counterterrorism. Such rhetoric blunts the possibility of developing a feminist politics that deliberately and creatively resists appropriation by the state and its expansionist and militaristic ventures. Moreover, the extraction of the category woman from a larger social context was also evident from the commentaries around the San Bernardino attack at Tashfeen Malik, who left her 6-month-old baby with her parents before she went on the shooting rampage. And here, we want to quote what Senator Dianne Feinstein had to say about the incident. And an interesting point for us here is how this San Bernardino case challenges this notion of mothers as key players that is so central to the CVE approach. So for us, the case illustrates how mothers were key players, challenges the notion of mothers as key players that is very central to CVE approach. It turns CVE on its head. The paternalistic nature of CVE that target local communities through women assumes that women are by nature pacifist and nonviolent, and that they will not, or rather choose not, to be radicalized. Malik's figure elicits a new type of anxiety among policymakers and the public, primarily because she is a woman and a mother. Now, how would thinking about individual women's simultaneous attachment to nation-state or religion, or political ideology, or even to imperial politics complicate how we think about Malik and the model of empowerment deployed by AMWEC in the context of securitization? So in conclusion, we want to say that we're way over time here really quickly. Is it? Okay. So in conclusion, we want to say that from this whole notion of from rescuing Muslim women to empowering Muslim women to now supporting the supposedly already empowered Muslim woman, that we must pay close attention to the spirit of feminist resistance that is born from the desire for a more just world that is not blunted by national security policies that work in the service of an unjust world. Thank you.
I have told Khanum and Azza that we won't take, am I on? We won't take any questions, but I think just we had the disagreement over how much time. In my estimation, they were over, but in their estimation, it was within 20 minutes. So anyway, but I would like to get a couple of questions if there are for Khanum and Azza before they leave, and you can always respond. You're going to respond on your life stories. So if there are a couple of questions, we can take them. If not, we will do them at the end of the time after everybody else. Cool. All right, so we're moving on to the next speaker. And the next paper is going to be presented by Juliette Garonier. Juliette Garonier is a PhD candidate in the joint PhD program in sociology between Sciences Po Paris and Northwestern University. She currently lives in Paris and recently co-organized a major international conference on conversion to Islam entitled Investigating Conversion to Islam, which approaches in social sciences. And it was held at Sciences Po Paris University in February 2016. Her dissertation is entitled Choosing Faith and Facing Faith, Converting to Islam in France and the United States. And the title of Julia's presentation is The Genealogies of Racialized Islamophobia, Muslim converts past and present encounters with race in France and the United States. And she actually goes through the 15th and 17th century, 15th and 18th, and 1500 and 1750, and then to the current presence in France and the United States. So I welcome Julia.
Thank you very much for being here and for allowing me to talk. So in my dissertation work, I compare the experiences of converts to Islam in France and the United States. And in this paper, I'm going to talk about Muslim converts' encounters with race through history. And in doing so, I'm hoping to contribute to the literature on Islamophobia. So there are debates within academia, but also within the larger public sphere, especially in my country, France, on whether Islamophobia is best defined as a form of religious intolerance against Islam, or whether it is more a form of racism against Muslims as a racialized people. Now, in the first interpretation, the people who adhere to Islamic beliefs are suspect because their beliefs are supposedly opposing Western liberal values of progress, secularism, and gender equality. And so in that interpretation, Islam is located within the realm of faith, beliefs, values, ideologies. Now in the second interpretation, Islamophobia, just like anti-Semitism, relies upon biological and cultural determinism. And so Muslims are identified in terms of their non-European descent, in terms of their non-being white. And in that sense, the category Muslim refers most to a racial category rather than a religious outlook. And so in that definition, Islam is located within the realm of the body, race, and culture. So these two definitions are, of course, ideal types, and to be sure, Islamophobia is certainly a mix of both religious intolerance and racism. So in this presentation, I don't want to adjudicate between the two, but what I'd like to do is offer additional empirical support for the second interpretation by emphasizing the importance of race and racialization in the production of Islamophobia in France and the United States. So in order to do so, the research strategy I advocate is to look at religious conversions and converts. And more specifically, I study the conversion of white people to Islam. So there are three main reasons why I do so. The first reason is that religious conversion is actually a good indicator of the permeability between groups. So as George Frederickson says, if conversion is a real possibility, then we have religious intolerance but not racism. And he's talking actually about anti-Semitism. For someone who is anti-Semitic, a Jew who converts to Christianity is still very much a Jew, because what causes problem is not his religious beliefs, but rather his so-called racial identity. So in that sense, I think we can investigate the racial dimension of the religious boundaries around Islam by looking at how converts have been perceived over time. Now, the second reason I look at religious conversion is because it has been at the very heart of the first episode of racialization of Islam. So Heather already talked about that, and I think you all know about that, but the formal origins of Islam racialization can be traced back to 16th century Spain, where the Catholic monarchs asked all Muslims and Jews residing on Spanish territory to convert to Christianity. Now, these new Christians remain very much suspect, and they were closely monitored by the Inquisition. Now, what's interesting is that the Inquisitors used skin color in order to track religious heresy. So these new Christians had ancestors who were Jewish and Muslims, and therefore they were deemed suspect, and their blood was impure, and therefore the sincerity of their faith was questioned. So this is really the first moment where religious conceptions shifted into racial conceptions, and religious conversion was really at the heart of this historical puzzle that linked religion and race. Now, the third reason why I want to focus on white converts in particular is because in a world where Islam and whiteness have been constructed as antithetical, white converts stood out. They don't fit into common sense expectations about who belongs to Islam and who does not belong to Islam. In fact, they create a cognitive dissonance in the minds of most people, as you can see on this very funny meme that I found on the internet: if you are Muslim, then why are you white? So because they disrupt traditional common sense normative expectations about race and religion, converts actually enable us to shed light on these various expectations. And then the last reason why I focus on white converts is because they are almost an experimental case. So you have people who, by virtue of their whiteness, belong to the invisible majority most of their lives and didn't have to experience direct racism. So it's very interesting to see what happens when